It started with an email that I wasn't supposed to see. My parents had always been the kind to send out family newsletters when they planned something special, like the time they went to Disney World and forgot to invite me, or when they went on a luxury cruise to the Caribbean and never mentioned it until after they had returned. This time, the email detailed a family vacation to a secluded cabin in the mountains. At first, I thought it was just a casual update, but then I realized there was no mention of me. Not once. I scanned through the message a second time, but there was a list of family members who were attending, no mention of me at all. It felt like a punch to the stomach, the kind of punch that makes you realize just how small your place in your own family really is. I had always known they were a tight-knit group, but as the years went by, I couldn't help but feel more and more like an outsider. My siblings had their own families, their own inside jokes, their own lives that didn't include me. I didn't know why. Was it because I wasn't married? Was it because I didn't have kids? Was it simply because they didn't like me? The reasons were unspoken, but they stung just the same. But this vacation, it was the last straw. They had been planning it for months, of course, and I'd known something was coming when the group chats started buzzing with excitement. Everyone but me. I couldn't even ask why I hadn't been invited, because, deep down, I already knew the answer. It was easier to ignore the elephant in the room than confront it, right? So, I did what anyone in my situation would do. I pretended like it didn't bother me. I smiled, nodded, and congratulated them on their plans. But inside, I was boiling. This was the family that always claimed to love me, yet they couldn't even extend an invitation. The more I thought about it, the more it hurt. But the real kicker came the next day. My doorbell rang, and when I opened it, I was greeted by the sight of my niece and nephew standing on my doorstep. They were holding suitcases. "Auntie, we're here. Mom and Dad said you'd look after us while they're gone." I froze. A sick feeling spread through my chest. They had left their kids with me. The very kids they never let me see unless they needed a favor, a helping hand. They were too busy with their own lives to even bother with me. But now they expected me to watch their children while they took a luxurious vacation without me? I didn't even know how to respond. The kids were looking up at me, confused, excited to stay at Auntie's house, not understanding the tension that was thick in the air. I glanced at them, and for a moment I felt a deep pang of guilt. What was I supposed to do now? Turn them away? Leave them out in the cold? But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the boiling anger bubbling up inside me. This was a deliberate act, a clear message. They didn't value me as a person, but only as a last-minute babysitter. I took a deep breath and forced a smile. "Come on in," I said, stepping aside to let them in. But I knew, deep down, this was the moment that everything changed. I had spent so many years trying to keep the peace, trying to be the good daughter, the helpful sister. But this time, something inside me snapped. As I closed the door behind the kids, I felt the weight of the situation press down on me. My niece and nephew were excited to be at my place, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that my family had just crossed a line. They didn't just forget to invite me to their vacation. They had deliberately left me out, assuming I would happily accept the responsibility of taking care of their kids. I was their backup, their plan B. It hurt more than I cared to admit. I tried to keep it together as I led the kids to the living room, setting them up with snacks and toys to keep them entertained. They were cute, and they always made me laugh, but the more I looked at them, the more I realized that I wasn't just angry at my family for dumping them on me. I was angry at myself. How could I keep letting them treat me like this? I made dinner that night, trying to focus on the task at hand. The kids were playing in the corner, and for a moment, it felt like a normal evening. But inside, my mind was racing. I couldn't help but replay the scenes from the past few years. Every family gathering, every event, every birthday, where I was the one left out. It had always been this way, but now it was different. Now it was personal. As I served the kids their food, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was a message from my sister. "Hey, we made it to the cabin. Hope the kids are being good for you. Enjoy your weekend with them. Wish you were here." I stared at the screen, the words feeling like salt in an open wound. She knew. She knew what she was doing. They all knew. It wasn't just a casual oversight. They had planned this. They had planned to leave me behind, once again, and here they were, acting as if everything was fine. As if I was just some convenient backup. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. How dare they assume I would drop everything to take care of their kids while they enjoyed their vacation? That was it. I'd had enough. I could feel my resolve harden inside me. I didn't want to be a doormat anymore. I didn't want to play the part of the dutiful, invisible family member who was always there when they needed me, but never included in their plans. I was done. After I put the kids to bed that night, I sat down at the kitchen table, my mind spinning with a plan. They thought they could take me for granted, but I was about to show them just how wrong they were. I packed my bags that night, slowly, carefully. I didn't want to leave the kids in a rush, and I didn't want to make any noise that would alert my family to what was coming. But in the early hours of the morning, just as the sun began to rise, I left. I took the money I had saved up over the years, enough to cover my rent and living expenses for a few months. I wasn't just walking away from their vacation, I was walking away from the whole damn situation. I left a note for the kids, telling them I had to go out of town for work, and that I hoped to see them soon. But the truth was, I didn't know when I would see them again. I didn't know if I ever would. I left my apartment, the city, everything I had known for so long. I didn't tell anyone where I was going or what I was doing. I just disappeared. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of freedom. I was no longer tied to the expectations of a family that didn't appreciate me. I was no longer the afterthought, the last-minute option. I was reclaiming my life. The first few days after I left were a blur. I didn't want to think about the family I had just abandoned or the repercussions of my decision. It felt almost surreal, like I had stepped into a new life, one where I wasn't constantly trying to keep up with the demands of others. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I was in control, making my own choices, and answering to no one. I found a small, quiet apartment in a different part of the city, far away from the places I used to frequent. It was bare at first, just a few basic pieces of furniture, but it felt like a fresh start. I made coffee in the mornings, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I went to bed without hearing the noise of family arguments or the guilt of taking care of other people's needs. It was peaceful. It was mine. But as the days turned into weeks, the silence started to weigh on me. At first, I relished the solitude. No messages, no calls, no obligations. But soon, the quiet grew louder. I began to miss the hum of everyday life, the constant chatter, the arguments, the shared meals. It wasn't that I missed being taken for granted. I missed the connection, the sense of belonging, even if it had always been on their terms. I kept expecting them to reach out, to ask if I was okay, to tell me that they missed me. But days turned into weeks, and there was nothing. No phone calls, no texts, not even an email. It was as if I had never existed in their lives at all. It stung. I had expected some level of discomfort, but this was different. It felt like I had been erased. My absence didn't seem to matter. They didn't seem to care. I tried to convince myself that this was for the best, that I had made the right decision by cutting ties, by stepping away from a family that clearly didn't value me. But the longer the silence lasted, the more I began to question myself. Had I done the right thing? Had I overreacted? Then one night, a message finally came. It was from my sister. "Where are you? The kids miss you. We need to talk." My heart raced as I read the words. It was the first sign of life, the first acknowledgement of my absence. I stared at the message for a long time before typing a response. I'm not sure what to say. I needed some space, and I don't think I'm ready to come back. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. I didn't expect an immediate response, but soon, my phone buzzed again. "You've been gone a long time. We were all hoping you'd come to your senses and reach out. It's not just about the kids, it's about family. We're worried about you." I felt a lump rise in my throat as I read her words. Part of me wanted to respond, to explain everything, to tell her how I felt abandoned, how they had used me all these years, how I was tired of being the one who was always there, but never truly part of the family. But another part of me, the part that had packed up and walked away, didn't want to go back to the same dynamic. I sat there, frozen, wondering if I could ever go back to the way things were, or if it was too late. The days following the message from my sister were a whirlwind. I spent more time thinking than I had in months, pondering what to do next. My phone sat on the table, an unspoken invitation to respond. Each time I glanced at it, a small voice in my head told me to just walk away. Forget about the past. Forget about them. But another part of me, the part that still clung to the hope of family, urged me to reach out, to fix things, to at least make an attempt at reconciliation. But what did I owe them? After everything, had I not given enough of myself over the years? Wasn't my choice to walk away justified? I had always been the one who showed up. I was the one who helped when no one else would, the one who supported them through thick and thin. Yet, when I needed them, when I was the one who needed help, I was left to fend for myself. They had never truly valued me. I was just the dependable one, the fallback, the go-to person when no one else was around. And yet, here I was, struggling with the guilt of not reaching out. The conflict inside me intensified. I knew that whatever decision I made, it would be final. If I went back, I would be stepping into a world where my needs would never be a priority. But if I stayed away, I would be cutting ties completely. It was a harsh choice, one that left me feeling conflicted. So I did what I always did when I was unsure, took a walk. The city was bustling with life, but the noise around me didn't reach me. I walked aimlessly, letting my thoughts settle. I passed by familiar streets, places where I had once laughed, celebrated, and cried. They no longer held the same significance to me. It felt as though I had lived a different life in those moments, one that no longer fit who I had become. The life I had before was just a series of scenes, faded and worn. And that was when it hit me. I had already chosen. My decision had already been made the moment I packed my bags and walked out of that door. There was no going back to a life of being used and taken for granted. There was no room for regret. The text from my sister still sat on my phone. Reminder of everything I had walked away from. It wasn't a question of whether or not I wanted to be a part of their lives anymore. It was about whether or not I wanted to keep sacrificing my peace for people who had never truly seen me. I walked back to my apartment with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. The weight in my chest that had been there for so long, the suffocating pressure of being constantly needed but never truly loved, lifted just a little. I didn't need to decide immediately. The answer would come, but I knew it wouldn't come from them. It would come from me. The decision was made. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone anymore. I had given so much of my time, energy, and heart to people who saw me as nothing more than a convenience. It wasn't a loss to walk away. It was freedom. I would no longer be the person they called when their world crumbled, only to be ignored when I needed them. But I still had a choice to make, how to go about it. I packed my things quietly. The suitcase was heavier than I expected, as though it carried more than just clothes and personal items. It was weighted down by the years of unspoken words, the resentment I had buried for so long. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. Not my family, not my friends, nobody. I had spent my whole life trying to appease everyone else, bending over backward to make things work. For once, I wasn't going to ask for anyone's approval. I wasn't going to wait for someone else's permission to live my life the way I saw fit. There was something thrilling about it. Something exhilarating in the idea of vanishing without a trace, leaving behind the toxic dynamics that had shaped my life for far too long. The morning I left, I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I didn't want to hear their excuses, their pleas, their fake apologies. They didn't deserve my closure. I left my phone on the kitchen counter, unlocked, with a simple message to my sister. I'm done. Don't contact me again. I made a conscious decision not to look back. Every step I took away from my old life felt like an act of defiance, like I was reclaiming something I had long forgotten, my own autonomy. I rented a small, anonymous apartment in a different neighborhood, somewhere far enough that no one would stumble across me. I changed my number, blocked every contact that could potentially lead back to them. It wasn't about running away. It was about creating a space where I could be truly free. I wasn't interested in being found. If they wanted to reach out, they could. But they would have to look for me, and that was something I wasn't prepared to make easy for them. For the first time in years, I felt the weight on my chest loosen. There was a sense of peace that came with being unreachable, untraceable. It was like I was being reborn. I didn't need to explain myself. I didn't owe anyone an explanation for choosing myself. I was no longer bound by the expectations they placed on me, the roles they had defined for me in their lives. But as the days turned into weeks, the quiet set in. It wasn't loneliness I felt, it was freedom. My life, once filled with constant noise and demands, was now eerily calm. It was unfamiliar at first, almost unsettling. But I embraced it. It was mine. The choice to disappear wasn't one made out of anger or bitterness. It was simply what I needed. I needed to let go of a life that had been built on compromises and sacrifices I hadn't been willing to make anymore. I needed to stop living for others and start living for myself. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was truly living. Weeks passed by, and the world around me felt as though it had paused. I had become a ghost, not just to my family, but to everyone I had ever known. The apartment I had chosen was small, tucked away in a quiet building where nobody would bother me. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of silence, a luxury I hadn't known I craved until now. Life was slow, but it was peaceful. I spent my days doing whatever I wanted. Sometimes I would wander the city, exploring unfamiliar streets, taking photographs of ordinary things I'd never noticed before. I spent hours at coffee shops, reading books I had never found the time for. On some evenings, I would just sit in my apartment, listening to music that made me feel something, anything. But the weight of my decision began to creep in at night. It wasn't the loneliness that bothered me. I'd learned how to be alone. It was the silence, the quiet that came with knowing no one was looking for me. No one was wondering where I was. No one cared enough to reach out. I was invisible. And while I had sought this for so long, it started to feel like a prison of my own making. One evening, as I sat in my apartment, a single thought entered my mind. They haven't even tried to contact me. For all their complaints and judgments, all the years of taking me for granted, not a single one of them had reached out to check on me. No phone calls, no texts, no emails. The family that once relied on me so heavily had simply let me go. At first, I was relieved. It confirmed everything I'd been feeling. They didn't need me. I wasn't the lifeline they'd always pretended I was. I was nothing more than a convenience, an obligation. But as the days turned into weeks, that sense of validation began to wear off, and the emptiness that followed began to settle in. Was I really better off? Had I made the right choice? It was on a rainy Thursday morning, almost a month after I'd disappeared, when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I picked it up cautiously, heart thudding in my chest. It was a message for my sister. "We need to talk, please." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken tension. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, pretending I never saw the message. But there was a part of me that wondered, was this finally the moment where things could change? Could there be a possibility of reconciliation? Or was this just another attempt to drag me back into their toxic orbit? I stared at the message for a long time. The phone buzzed again. "Please, just call me." I hadn't realized how much I'd been waiting for this. I hadn't expected it to come from my sister, of all people. I thought it would be one of them, my parents, trying to get me to come back. But no, this was my sister, the one who had never really understood why I left. I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to continue my life without the complication of their drama. But a small, reluctant part of me was curious. After everything, I still wanted to know if they had truly realized what they had lost. I took a deep breath and typed a simple response. "What do you want?" The answer came almost immediately. "Can we talk in person?" I thought about it for a while, wondering if I was ready to face them. Was I ready to confront everything that had happened? To hear whatever excuses they had for the years of mistreatment? I sat there, the phone in my hand, unsure of what to do next, and I stared at the phone for what felt like an eternity. It seemed absurd that after all these years, the possibility of talking to my family had suddenly become so important to me. But it wasn't just about the family dynamics anymore. It wasn't about them being right or wrong. It was about me, about how far I had come in my journey of self-discovery, and how much I had changed since I left. I hesitated for a long time before I finally replied, "Fine." When and where? The message came through quickly. Saturday, 2 p.m. at the old family restaurant. It'll be just us. No one else will be there. The words felt surreal. The old family restaurant. It had always been a place of comfort and warmth, a place where we celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays. The smell of fresh pasta and garlic, the sound of the waiter's chatter, and the clinking of glasses. All of it was woven into the fabric of my memories. It used to be where we could talk and laugh together as a family. I hadn't been there in years. I wondered if this would feel like old times, or if it would just be a hollow attempt to mend a broken bond. The day of the meeting arrived quickly. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. The woman I saw was not the same one who had left so abruptly. I had changed both inside and out. I was no longer that scared, frustrated version of myself. I was someone who had finally started to breathe freely. And yet here I was, on the verge of facing the very people who had suffocated me for so long. I wore a simple, elegant black dress. Nothing too flashy, just enough to feel confident in my own skin. I wasn't going to wear a mask for them anymore. This time, I was going to show up as myself. If they couldn't accept that, then that was their problem, not mine. When I walked into the family restaurant, I was met with a strange blend of nostalgia and dread. The warm lighting, the familiar hum of conversation, it was all still there, frozen in time. But as I walked deeper into the restaurant, I saw them. My parents sat at a table, looking older, their faces weathered by time and the weight of their decisions. My sister was next to them, looking almost nervous, her hands fiddling with the menu. They looked up when I walked in, and for a split second, it felt like the air between us had thickened. There was so much history between us, so much unspoken tension. And yet, there we were, in the same room, about to have the conversation we had avoided for years. I stood still for a moment, taking it all in. The table was set for 3, no extra place settings. This wasn't about appearances. This was about something more. This was about facing the truth of our fractured family. "Hi," I said softly, breaking the silence. The word felt strange on my tongue, like a distant echo. But it was all I could manage at that moment. My mother's eyes softened, and for a moment, I saw the woman who had once held me close. The woman who had whispered in my ear that everything would be okay. But that woman had disappeared a long time ago. In her place was someone who seemed unsure, broken even. "Hi," she replied, her voice barely audible. "We've missed you." I wanted to say so many things, to scream at them, to ask them why they had treated me like I was nothing. But instead, I just stood there, feeling the weight of their gaze on me. Finally, my sister spoke up, her voice trembling. "I don't know what happened, but I need you to know I'm sorry. For everything. I never meant for it to go this far." Her apology was unexpected, but in that moment, I realized that it wasn't just about them apologizing to me. It was about understanding that we were all flawed. We had all made mistakes. And maybe, just maybe, This conversation was the first step toward healing. The next few hours felt like a blur. We talked about the past, the hurt, the silence. We finally addressed everything that had been left unsaid for years. There were tears, moments of awkwardness, and plenty of silence, but it felt real. It felt like we were finally opening the door to something we had all been too afraid to confront. As the meeting came to a close, I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if we could truly rebuild the relationship we once had. But one thing was certain. I wasn't the same person who had left them all those months ago. I had grown. And no matter what happened next, I had learned that it was okay to put myself first. And that, more than anything, was a victory. The days that followed our reunion were strange. It felt like I had opened a door that I had kept closed for so long. And though the light was dim, there was a glimpse of something better on the other side. I couldn't deny that it had been a huge step forward, but I wasn't naive enough to think that everything was fixed. The past had left scars on all of us, and those scars weren't going to disappear overnight. But what struck me the most in the days after our conversation was the sense of liberation I felt. The weight I had been carrying for so long, the anger, the confusion, the resentment, had started to lift. I had stopped pretending that things didn't matter. I had stopped pretending that I was okay with the way they treated me. I was ready to leave all of that behind. My phone buzzed as I sat on the couch one evening, scrolling through some old photos. It was a message from my sister. "Hey, I just wanted to check in. Are you okay?" I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of what to say. Part of me wanted to brush it off, to say that everything was fine and that I had moved on. But the truth was, I didn't really know how I felt yet. I wasn't healed, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life. I replied simply, "I'm doing better. One step at a time." Her response was quick. "We're here whenever you're ready. No rush." It was a small gesture, but it was enough. It was enough to show me that maybe there was hope. That maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild the pieces of our family, even if it was in a way that looked nothing like it used to. The days turned into weeks, and as time passed, I found myself at peace with what had happened. I no longer felt the need to explain myself to anyone. I didn't have to justify my choices, my life, or the way I had decided to walk away. The anger had dissipated, replaced with a quiet understanding that I had done what I needed to do to survive. I had found my own way, and no matter what came next, that was something no one could take from me. I kept my distance, but I also started to reconnect in small ways. Coffee dates with my sister, casual conversations with my parents. But there were no grand gestures, no attempts to make up for lost time. Instead, there was a slow, steady rebuilding, one conversation at a time. And in the end, I realized that maybe that was enough. Maybe it wasn't about finding some perfect resolution. Maybe it was simply about accepting that the past would always be there, but so would the future. And the future was mine to shape, mine to make the most of. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need anyone's validation. I had learned that family didn't have to be perfect, but it had to be real. And now, I was ready to live my truth, whatever that meant. And with that, I finally closed the chapter one thought I'd never be able to write. The journey wasn't easy, but I had made it through. And the best part? I was no longer running away from my past. Instead, I was embracing the future with open arms. The weeks that followed felt like a delicate balance. It was as if I were standing on a tightrope, unsure of where each step would lead, but I was determined not to fall. I had reconnected with my family, but it wasn't without hesitation. Each interaction was a careful step, testing the waters. I wasn't sure what they expected from me, and I wasn't ready to let go of the years of hurt, but I had started to feel something else, something I hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. The anger I had carried for so long had faded into something less volatile, less dangerous. It wasn't that I had forgiven them, not yet at least, but I had stopped letting their mistakes control my life. It was empowering, and in some way, it felt like I was reclaiming the pieces of myself I had lost over the years. I started focusing on the things that mattered to me now. Work became a sanctuary. I threw myself into it, not to escape, but to build something for myself, on my own terms. Every small success felt like a quiet victory. My colleagues noticed the change in me. They noticed how I carried myself with a confidence I hadn't shown before, as if I were a new version of the person I used to be. And, in many ways, I was. One afternoon, I received a message from my mother. It had been a while since we'd talked, but she had been reaching out more frequently. Her messages were short, but there was something different about the tone this time. She wasn't just asking about my day, she was telling me about hers. "I saw a picture of you at that event last week. You looked happy." It was strange, seeing something so simple and yet so loaded with meaning. For so long, I had felt invisible to them, as though nothing I did could ever make an impact. And now, here was my mother, acknowledging my presence in a way that didn't feel forced or obligatory. It felt genuine. I didn't know what it meant or if it was enough. But it was a start. A small one, but still a start. Later that evening, as I sat on the couch reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized that I was no longer chasing anyone's approval. I had finally stopped looking for validation from people who had been absent when I needed them most. For the first time in years, I could honestly say I was content with who I had become. But that didn't mean I had forgotten the lessons I had learned. I had learned to put myself first, to prioritize my own well-being over the approval of others. I had learned that it was okay to walk away when necessary, and that the people who truly mattered would understand. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about making them pay for the years of hurt they had caused. It was about finding peace, about living my life on my terms, regardless of what anyone else thought. I still had a long way to go before I could say that my family was whole again. But I had come to terms with the fact that some things, some relationships, take time to rebuild. And that was okay. I didn't need to have all the answers right now. I didn't need everything to be fixed overnight. What mattered was that I was moving forward. And with every day, I was closer to becoming the person I had always been meant to be. As the months passed, things began to fall into place. I found a rhythm in my life that didn't revolve around the family I once thought I needed. My career flourished, and I surrounded myself with friends who genuinely cared about me. People who saw me for who I was, not for the mistakes of my past or the expectations of my family. It was a strange sense of freedom, realizing that I had built a life for myself, one that was mine alone. And it felt incredibly good. My interactions with my family became more infrequent. The guilt that had once weighed on me lifted gradually. And though I still held some resentment, I no longer let it dictate my decisions. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had earned my place in the world, and I was no longer seeking approval from those who had abandoned me when I needed them most. One day, unexpectedly, my sister called. The first few minutes of our conversation were awkward, both of us unsure how to approach the silence that had existed between us for so long. But slowly, the conversation began to flow. She apologized for the things that had happened, and though her words weren't perfect, they were enough. I didn't have to forgive her immediately, but I realized that I was willing to try to rebuild what had been broken. It wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about accepting it and moving forward together. We agreed to meet, cautiously, for lunch. The encounter was nothing like the tense moments I had imagined. There was no grand reconciliation, no dramatic revelation. Just two people sitting down and talking about life, as if nothing had ever come between us. It was refreshing, and strangely, it felt like the first step in healing the deep rift between us. In the weeks that followed, my family made efforts to be a part of my life in a way that didn't feel forced. I didn't expect them to change overnight, but I noticed the subtle shifts. My mother sent me a message one evening, asking how I was doing with a warmth that had been absent for years. It was the first time in a long time that I felt like I was more than just a forgotten member of the family. I didn't need a dramatic reunion. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. What I had learned in the months since I left was that family wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about always getting along. It was about showing up even if it was hard, and about being there when it mattered most. My family and I were far from perfect, but we were still family. As the year came to a close, I looked back on the journey with a quiet sense of pride. I had packed up my life and walked away from a situation that had drained me, but I had also rediscovered who I was in the process. The people I chose to keep in my life were the ones who respected me, loved me, and valued me for who I was, not for what they wanted me to be. And that made all the difference. I had vanished without a word, but I had also found my way back, in my own time and on my own terms. The story of my life was still being written, and I was in control of the pen. And with that, I knew that whatever came next, I was ready. Because sometimes, walking away is the only way to find your way back.